Franz Liszt took up full-time residence in the city of German poets Goethe and Schiller in 1848 and started a war. The Old Weimar consisted of the burghers and councilmen of Weimar, dedicated to keeping the Old Weimar of Goethe and Schiller alive and thriving. Liszt created a new Weimar where he pushed the boundaries of art and music through his own compositions and through the composers he advocated for, including Berlioz and Wagner. His first season in Weimar set the stage for this immense battle and his eventual resignation. My name is Dr. Dominique Royam, and I'm a music director, conductor, and music communicator, here to help you achieve a deeper connection to the music you love. Follow me on social media at Dominique Royam for more content. Now let's talk about Liszt at Weimar. When Liszt moved to Weimar, he established a residence at Altenburg, a large mansion in the hills surrounding Weimar, where he lived until 1861. It was his longest residence he held in his life and became a center for his activities during his years in Weimar. He lived there with Princess Caroline von Sayn-Wittgenstein as husband and wife. Caroline was in a battle to annul her loveless marriage to Prince Nicholas von Sayn-Wittgenstein, whom she left just a few years earlier after she married him under parental pressure at 17. The process of annulling her marriage was a long, drawn-out one, taking almost 20 years. She and Liszt desired to marry as soon as she was able to do so, so they lived as partners for their entire time in Weimar. The locals did not like this arrangement, and Liszt only got out of the prison term for adultery because of his imperial patronage. Caroline was shunned by the local aristocracy for her entire time in Weimar due to her relationship with Liszt. Thanks to the benevolent patronage of Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, the wife of the Grand Duke of Weimar and sister to Tsar Nicholas I of Russia, Weimar boasted a lively intellectual scene. It had a theater and an orchestra, its own poets and painters, and an academy of scientists. The nearby town of Jena held a university. Liszt saw his appointment as an opportunity to uplift the music of Weimar and the surrounding region, Thuringia. Young, talented musicians of all stripes descended to Weimar to be near Liszt because they were convinced that Liszt was where the future lay. Some of them were the avant-gardists of the day and advanced the language of harmony, developed new orchestral sounds, and threw out traditional forms and created new ones. They coalesced under the banner of the New German School, placed in opposition to the more restrained musicians of the day, including Mendelssohn, Schumann, and Brahms. This War of the Romantics mirrored the battle between New and Old Weimar. Old Weimar, the section bent on preserving the glorious past of Goethe and Schiller, hated the New Weimar of Liszt. Liszt had to fight major artistic battles against Old Weimar, including the ignorance and prejudice of theater management, slothfulness of local performers, and the Philistine tastes of local audiences. It was in Weimar that Liszt created the never-before-seen masterclass. He would have his students take lessons from him, with the rest of his students in attendance. The students would all file into the room with Liszt's piano in Altenburg and deposit the music they had prepared on the piano. Liszt would come in and select what he wanted to hear, and the student in question would play it. Sometimes Liszt would stop the performance to solicit opinions from his gathered students about how to better craft an artistic vision of the work. Liszt did not instruct his students on technique. Instead, he was solely focused on interpretation. He used to tell students to wash their dirty linen at home, i.e., solve their technical problems before they came to him. Liszt focused on musical interpretation with a combination of anecdote, metaphor, and wit. Friedrich Lamond and others like to say that Liszt taught through parable, always with a poetic image in mind. He advised one student tapping out the opening chords of Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata, "Do not chop beefsteak for us," to another who blurred the rhythm in Liszt's Gommerein, "There you go again, mixing salad." Liszt also wanted to avoid creating carbon copies of himself. Rather, he believed in preserving artistic individuality at all costs. He also never charged for lessons, ever, no matter where he was. It was part of his philosophical position to encourage genius wherever he found it. Liszt also began his career as a composer at Weimar. He composed 12 symphonic poems, a genre he invented while at Weimar. The symphonic poem, or the tone poem, is a one-movement work that is based around a theme that is usually literary in nature. Other symphonic poem themes can be derived from art, the stage, or life. Liszt combined the concert overture with the symphony to create the long-form symphonic poem. A concert overture is usually 10 minutes in length, but the symphonic poem can be upwards of 45 minutes. Liszt rejected the usual methods of creating musical movements of that length, namely the sonata form. Liszt instead used thematic transformation. Thematic transformation is where a theme, or a leitmotif, is run through a set of permutations, including augmentation, diminution, and fragmentation, so that the theme appears in many disguises and different roles in the work. It is used by many great composers, such as Beethoven in the 6th and 9th symphonies, and Schubert in the Wanderer Fantasy, a composition that greatly impacted Liszt. Liszt perfected the sole use of thematic transformation as the impetus for longer symphonic structures and inspired many musicians that came after him, including Wagner, Schoenberg, and others. Let's listen to the iconic fanfare at the end of Liszt's third tone poem, Les Preludes. The work began as an overture to Liszt's choral cycle, Les Quatre Elements, the Four Elements, then revised under the inspiration from the French poet Alphonse de Lamartine. It was composed during the years of 1849 to 55. The long compositional process reflects Liszt's relative lack of experience in handling an orchestra. Liszt would sketch out the work in piano form with notes about the orchestrations. His assistant, Joachim Raff, would create a full score from Liszt's directions, and then the work would be played by the Weimar Court Orchestra. Liszt would then revamp the work, sometimes completely rewriting it based on what he heard in the playthrough. This torturous process shortened as Liszt's experience with orchestrations grew. This was also the first time anyone had ever used the term symphonic poem in reference to an orchestral work. The reception to this new form and this specific work was mixed. The critic Edward Hanslick, a firm backer of the more conservative end of the war romantics, lambasted Les Preludes. In an 1857 article following a performance in Vienna, he denounced the idea of a symphonic poem as a contradiction in terms. He also denied that music was in any way a language that could express anything, and mocked Liszt's assertion that it could translate concrete ideas or assertions. The work continued to be performed around Europe occasionally, especially by Liszt's disciples in and around Germany. The closing fanfare of Les Preludes was used for news bulletins during the Nazi regime, state broadcasters, while the presenters introduced a Nazi victory. There was a de facto ban on the piece in Germany for some time after the war because of its militaristic connotations. The work was written for a large symphony orchestra of romantic proportions, including strings, woodwind, brass, including tuba and bass trombone, harp, and a variety of percussion instruments, like the timpani, side drum, bass drum, and cymbals. Let's listen to the fanfare now. Liszt also lifted up other composers during his time at Weimar. He would constantly program the music of Wagner, then in exile from Germany for his part in the unsuccessful May Uprising in Dresden. Liszt staged some of the middle period operas of Wagner at the Imperial Theater, including Der Fleinige Holländer and Tannhäuser. Liszt and Wagner became close friends during this time, exchanging letters constantly. Wagner even started asking Liszt for money to continue his extravagant lifestyle, stooping to begging and haranguing Liszt if the money was not transferred fast enough. Wagner even married Liszt's daughter Cosima after her disastrous marriage and Protestant divorce to Liszt's disciple Hans von Bülow. Liszt was the only conductor in Germany that dared to program Wagner's music during his exile because of Wagner's association with leftist politics. Liszt also did a lot to further the career of Berlioz, especially during the time that the composer had no following in his home country of France. Liszt put on 2 Berlioz festivals in Weimar with the composer in residence. Major works by the composer were featured, including Romeo and Juliet, The Damnation of Faust, Symphonie Fantastique, and the opera Benvenuto Cellini. Berlioz shared the podium, and thus the conducting duties, with Liszt. Berlioz was wined and dined by the Grand Duke on both occasions, including inducting him into the Order of the White Falcon during the first Berlioz Festival. Liszt's concentrations on the music of Berlioz and Wagner are part of the bedrock of Liszt's personality. Liszt was able to divorce the idea of art from the artist and focus on the genius of the art alone. This is why he was able to separate the politics of Wagner from his music and still program it during Wagner's exile. Liszt would promote genius wherever he found it, including single musicians, composers, and performers of all stripes. During Liszt's time in Weimar, he also completed his greatest work, the Sonata in B minor. It was completed on February 2, 1853, during the hectic first Berlioz Festival. It is a masterwork in grand proportions, clocking in at over 30 minutes of uninterrupted music. The form was unique at the time. The sonata is in 4 large sections, sometimes seen as movements without a break, and the whole work is a large sonata form. Liszt composed a sonata in a technique not seen again until Arnold Schoenberg's First Chamber Symphony more than 50 years later. Nowhere is Liszt's use of the thematic transformation seen to better effect. The entire work is based on 3 small snippets of music first heard in the introduction. Liszt takes these 3 motives, combines them, and morphs them into all the complexity needed for a work that is 30 minutes in length. No other work of Liszt has attracted so much scholarly attention. There are many different theories of what the sonata is about, including that the sonata is a musical portrait of the Faust legend, it is autobiographical, it's based on the divine and diabolical in Milton's Paradise Lost, it's an allegro of the Garden of Eden and the Fall, or that the sonata has no programmatic allusions whatsoever. The sonata was published in the spring of 1854 with a dedication to Robert Schumann, and thanks for his dedication of the latter's Fantasy in C major. Schumann never knew of the dedication because he was already in the asylum outside of Bonn when the manuscript arrived. Clara Schumann hated the work, writing in her diary that the sonata was merely a blind noise, no healthy ideas anymore, everything confused, one cannot find a single clear harmonic progression, yet I must thank him for it, it is really too awful. Clara's comments about the work mirror the public reception. It was attacked by Edward Hanslick, who said, anyone who has heard it and finds it beautiful is beyond help. And Johannes Brahms is said to have fallen asleep during a performance. The ugly reception was tempered by history, with the stark originality becoming more and more accepted as time passed. It is now considered to be Liszt's masterpiece. Let's listen to the introduction of the work, where the 3 motives can be heard. Liszt's time in Weimar as the Kapellmeister was always hard-going. Rumors constantly swirled that he would resign from his post. Sometimes these were fabrications of the old Weimar sect, but sometimes they sprouted from Liszt's own disparaging remarks about the conditions in Weimar. He applied to the Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna a number of times to improve the working conditions of the opera and the orchestra, to no avail. He finally resigned after a long, drawn-out fight with the newly appointed head of the Weimar Theater, Franz Liszt. Liszt made revolutionary changes to the court theater, and because of this, Liszt's programming suggestions kept being pushed out. Liszt removed himself from theatrical productions in 1859, but continued to conduct concerts in the palace until the summer of 1861, after which he completely retreated from musical life in Weimar. Liszt and Caroline continued to live in Weimar until 1861, due to the delicate situation of the negotiations for her marriage annulment. Thank you for joining me in this series about the life of Liszt. If you'd like to learn more about the composer, the best biography is a 3-volume compendium by Alan Walker. This video was based on a lot of information I got from the second volume, Franz Liszt, The Weimar Years. A link to it can be found in the description box below. Like this video, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more. What do you want to learn about next? Leave me a comment down below. You can also support the making of these videos on Patreon. These videos take over 20 hours of research to complete, so Patreon is a great way to show your support. The bibliography for this video can be found on my website, dominiqueroyam.com. Interested in seeing my process? I document it on my social media, so follow me for more updates. My handles are below. Thanks again, and see you in my next video.